Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stacked books in the university library. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her tired face. She had been working there for 2 years, saving every penny she could while studying business administration part-time. At 22, she already felt older than her classmates who didn't need to work multiple jobs to pay for their education. The library doors swung open, and David walked in with his usual confident stride. His medical textbooks were perfectly organized in his backpack, and his white coat gleamed even though he was still in his second year. Maria's heart skipped a beat the way it always did when she saw him. They had been dating for 3 years now, ever since they met at a campus coffee shop during her freshman year. "Hey, beautiful," David whispered as he approached her desk, making sure the librarian couldn't hear. "Still planning to wait for me while I become the best doctor this city has ever seen?" Maria smiled, though something in his tone made her stomach flutter with unease. "Of course I am. We talked about this, remember? 8 years isn't that long when you think about our whole lives together." David leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "I got accepted into the advanced program. It means longer hours, more studying, less time for other things." His eyes avoided hers as he spoke. "But think about our future, Maria. Think about the house we'll have, the life we'll build. I'll be making 6 figures by the time I'm 30. She reached for his hand across the desk. "I don't care about the money, David. I care about us. I'll wait however long it takes because I love you." Something flickered across his face, but it was gone before she could identify it. "I love you too," he said, but the words felt rehearsed. "I have to go study for my anatomy exam. See you this weekend?" After he left, Maria sat alone among the dusty books, trying to shake the feeling that something had changed between them. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo they had taken last month at her cousin's wedding. David's arm was around her waist, and they were both laughing at something her uncle had said. They looked perfect together, she thought, like they belonged. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments between his classes and her work shifts. David seemed more distant, always checking his phone during their conversations and cutting their dates short to study with his study group. Maria told herself it was normal. Medical school was demanding, and she needed to be understanding. One evening, as she was closing up the library, she found a note tucked between the pages of a book David had been reading. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. It was a phone number written in elegant handwriting, with "Call me Jessica" written underneath. Jessica Morrison, she realized with a sinking heart. The daughter of the hospital director where David was doing his rotations. Maria's world tilted on its axis. She sat down heavily in one of the wooden chairs, the note crumpling in her fist. Part of her wanted to confront him immediately, to demand an explanation. But a larger part of her was terrified of what she might discover. Instead, she carefully smoothed out the paper and placed it back in the book, pretending she had never seen it. That weekend, David canceled their usual Saturday dinner, claiming he had an important study session. Maria spent the evening alone in her tiny studio apartment, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She saw a girl who worked too hard, worried too much, and loved someone who might not love her back the same way anymore. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching couples walk hand in hand down the street below. 8 years suddenly felt like a lifetime. But she had made a promise, and Maria Santos had never broken a promise in her life. She would wait for David to become the doctor he dreamed of being. She would trust in the love they had built together, even as doubt crept into her heart like winter fog. The next morning, she woke up determined to fight for their relationship. She would be the girlfriend David needed, the support system that would help him achieve his dreams. After all, love meant sacrifice, didn't it? And if waiting 8 years was what it took to prove her devotion, then that's exactly what she would do. Little did Maria know that her 8-year journey of waiting was about to test every ounce of strength, dignity, and self-respect she possessed. The girl who stacked books in the university library had no idea that she would one day be mopping the floors of the very hospital where her dreams would finally shatter completely. 3 years had passed since Maria found that note, and she had convinced herself it meant nothing. David had graduated from medical school and was now in his residency at St. Mary's Hospital. Their relationship had survived his intense study schedule, though it had changed in ways Maria tried not to think about too deeply. She had graduated with her business degree, but couldn't find a job that paid enough to cover her student loans and living expenses. The economy was tough and entry-level positions were scarce. To make ends meet, she had taken a job as a night shift cleaner at a downtown office building. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave her days free to look for better opportunities. David's schedule was brutal. He worked 18-hour shifts at the hospital, often sleeping in the on-call room rather than coming home to the small apartment they now shared. When he was home, he was usually exhausted and irritable. Their conversations had become functional rather than romantic, focusing on schedules, bills, and his career advancement. "I need to focus completely on my residency," he told her one evening as she served him dinner. "The attending physicians are watching everything I do. One mistake could cost me a good fellowship placement." Maria nodded, understanding but feeling increasingly invisible in their relationship. "I know, David, I'm proud of how hard you're working." He barely looked up from his medical journals. "The chief of surgery mentioned there's going to be an opening in cardiothoracic surgery next year. If I can impress Dr. Morrison, I might have a shot at it." The name made Maria's stomach clench, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "Dr. Morrison?" "Yeah, he's the department head. His daughter Jessica is in the pediatrics residency program. Smart girl, really dedicated to her work." David's tone was carefully neutral, but Maria caught something in his voice that made her blood run cold. That night, after David fell asleep, Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one with dreams and ambitions of her own. Somewhere along the way, she had become a supporting character in David's story, and she wasn't sure how to find her way back to being the protagonist of her own life. The next morning, David left early for his shift, and Maria decided to visit him at the hospital during her lunch break from her new temp job at a law firm. She had been there a few times before, usually bringing him coffee or a homemade lunch when he forgot to eat. As she walked through the gleaming corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, she felt out of place in her thrift store blouse and worn shoes. The hospital was a world of crisp uniforms, expensive equipment, and people who belonged to a social class she could only observe from the outside. She found David in the break room, but he wasn't alone. A beautiful woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive-looking white coat was sitting across from him. They were laughing about something, their heads bent close together over coffee and pastries that definitely hadn't come from the hospital cafeteria. "David," Maria called out softly from the doorway. He looked up, and for just a moment she saw something that might have been guilt flash across his face. "Maria, what are you doing here?" "I brought you lunch," she said, holding up the brown bag she had packed. "But I can see you're busy." The blonde woman turned around, and Maria found herself looking into the confident blue eyes of someone who had never had to work multiple jobs to pay for college. "You must be Maria," the woman said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Jessica Morrison. David's told me so much about you, has he?" Maria replied, wondering what exactly David had said about the girlfriend who waited for him while cleaning office buildings at night. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. David stood up abruptly, taking the lunch bag from Maria's hands. "Thanks for bringing this. I'll call you later, okay? Jessica and I were just discussing a case we're working on together." As Maria walked back through the hospital corridors, she caught sight of herself in a reflective window. She looked tired, older than her 25 years, and completely out of place in this world of medicine and money that David was climbing into. For the first time, she wondered if love was enough to bridge the growing gap between who she was and who David was becoming. That evening, when David came home, he was unusually talkative about his day. He mentioned Jessica several times, always in professional contexts, but Maria noticed how his voice changed when he said her name. It became warmer, more animated, the way it used to sound when he talked about Maria herself. She went to bed that night with a growing certainty that something fundamental was shifting in their relationship. The 8-year promise she had made suddenly felt less like a romantic commitment and more like a prison sentence she had imposed on herself. 2 more years passed, and Maria's life had taken an unexpected turn for the worse. The law firm where she had been working as a temp had to lay off several employees due to budget cuts, and Maria was among the first to go. Despite having a business degree, she struggled to find stable employment. The few interviews she managed to get led nowhere, and her student loan payments were eating up most of her savings. David was now in his 4th year of residency and had successfully secured a position in the cardiothoracic surgery program. He was earning a decent salary, But he had also developed expensive tastes to match his rising status in the medical community. He bought tailored suits for medical conferences, drove a leased BMW, and frequently attended charity galas and hospital fundraising events. "You should come with me to the Morrison Foundation Gala next month," David suggested one evening as he adjusted his new silk tie in their bedroom mirror. "It's an important networking opportunity." Maria looked down at her faded jeans and oversized sweater. "I don't think I have anything appropriate to wear to something like that." "Well, maybe it's time to invest in some nicer clothes," David said, his tone suggesting this was obvious. "Image is important in my field, Maria. People notice these things." The implication stung. Maria had been supporting them both financially during his early residency years, using her savings and working extra shifts to keep them afloat. Now that David was earning money, he seemed to have forgotten those sacrifices. "I'll see what I can do," she said quietly, knowing she couldn't afford the type of dress that would be appropriate for a gala attended by the city's medical elite. A week later, Maria was forced to take a job she never thought she would need. The hospital where David worked was hiring night custodial staff, and the pay was better than anything else she could find. The irony wasn't lost on her that she would be cleaning the same floors where her boyfriend was building his prestigious career. Her supervisor was Mrs. Chen, a kind woman in her 50s who had been working at the hospital for over 20 years. "It's honest work," Mrs. Chen told her during training. "People look down on us sometimes, but this hospital wouldn't run without us. We keep things clean and safe for the patients." Maria's shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. She mopped floors, emptied trash bins, cleaned bathrooms, and sanitized equipment. The work was physically demanding, but it gave her time to think. Too much time, actually. As she pushed her cart through the empty corridors, she couldn't help but imagine David walking these same hallways during the day, respected and admired, while she remained invisible in her gray uniform. She had been working at the hospital for about a month when she first saw David and Jessica together outside of the break room encounter. It was 3 a.m., and she was cleaning the windows near the cardiac surgery department when she spotted them in the consultation room. They were reviewing patient files, but their body language suggested something more intimate than professional collaboration. Jessica's hand rested on David's arm as she pointed to something on the computer screen, and he was looking at her with an expression of admiration that Maria recognized because it used to be directed at her. Maria quickly moved away from the window, her heart pounding. She told herself she was overreacting, that they were just colleagues working late, but deep down she knew she was witnessing the beginning of something that would destroy everything she had built her life around. The next morning, when David came home from his shift, Maria was getting ready for bed. They passed each other like ships in the night, their schedules now completely opposite. He looked exhausted but also energized in a way she hadn't seen in years. "How was your night?" she asked, testing the waters. "Long. We had a complicated surgery that ran late, and then I had to review cases for tomorrow's presentations." He paused, then added, "Jessica really knows her stuff. She's probably going to be one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country." There it was again, that tone of admiration and respect. When was the last time David had spoken about her accomplishments with such pride? Maria couldn't remember. As David showered and prepared for bed, Maria sat at their small kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to process her emotions. She felt like she was watching her life from the outside, seeing herself as a character in someone else's story. The girl who had promised to wait 8 years for her boyfriend to become a doctor was now cleaning the hospital where he worked, invisible to him and everyone else who mattered in his new world. She pulled out her phone and looked at their old photos together. They seemed like artifacts from a different lifetime, evidence of a relationship that had existed between two different people. The David in those photos was a struggling medical student who needed her support and encouragement. The Maria in those photos was a young woman with dreams and aspirations of her own. Now, David was becoming the successful doctor he had always planned to be, while Maria had somehow become a ghost in her own life, existing in the shadows of his achievements. She wondered if this was what love was supposed to feel like, or if she had confused love with the fear of starting over. Maria had been working at the hospital for 6 months when the inevitable happened. It was a Tuesday night in March, and she was cleaning the administrative offices on the 3rd floor when she heard familiar voices coming from Dr. Morrison's office. The door was slightly ajar and she could see David and Jessica inside. But they weren't reviewing medical charts this time. Jessica was sitting on the edge of the desk, and David was standing between her legs, his hands on her waist. They were kissing with the passion of two people who had been fighting their attraction for months. Maria stood frozen in the hallway, her mop bucket forgotten, watching the man she had loved for 8 years betray everything they had built together. "We can't keep doing this," Jessica whispered when they broke apart. "It's too risky." "I know," David replied, but he made no move to step away from her. "I just can't stop thinking about you." "About us? What about Maria?" Jessica asked, and Maria leaned closer to hear David's response. There was a long pause before David answered. She's a good person. She's been supportive through everything. But we've grown apart. She doesn't understand my world, Jessica. She doesn't fit into the life I'm building." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She had to grip the wall to keep from falling. 8 years of her life, 8 years of sacrifice and patience, and this was how he saw her. Not as the woman who had loved him when he was nobody, but as someone who didn't fit into his upgraded life. "Maybe it's time to be honest with her," Jessica said softly. "It's not fair to keep her hoping for something that isn't going to happen." "You're right," David agreed. "After I finish my residency next year and get the fellowship position, I'll talk to her. I just need to time it right." Maria backed away from the door, her hands shaking as she gripped her cleaning cart. She made it to the janitor's closet before her legs gave out, and she sat on an overturned bucket, crying silently into her hands. The 8-year promise that had defined her adult life was revealed to be meaningless. She was just an inconvenience David was planning to discard once his career was secure. The rest of her shift passed in a haze. She went through the motions of cleaning, but her mind was spinning with the reality of her situation. She had no savings, no career prospects, and no backup plan. Her entire identity had become wrapped up in being David's girlfriend, the woman who waited for him to become successful. When she got home that morning, David was already gone for his day shift. Maria sat in their apartment looking around at the life they had built together. Most of the furniture was hers, bought during the years when she was supporting them both. The books on the shelves were a mixture of her business textbooks and his medical journals. Photos of them together covered every surface, documenting 8 years of shared history. She picked up one photo from their college graduation. They looked so young and hopeful, convinced that love could conquer anything. Maria barely recognized the girl in the photo, the one who believed that sacrifice and loyalty would be rewarded with a happy ending. That evening, when David came home, Maria watched him with new eyes. She noticed how he checked his phone constantly, probably texting Jessica. She saw how he avoided eye contact during dinner, how he seemed eager to end their conversations quickly. The signs had been there for months, maybe even years, but she had chosen to ignore them. "How was your day?" she asked, testing to see if he would mention working late with Jessica again. "Busy, the usual." He paused, then added, "I might be working late more often in the coming months. There are some important cases coming up." "More lies." Maria nodded and smiled, playing the role of the understanding girlfriend one more time. But inside she was making plans. She couldn't continue living this lie, waiting for a man who was already planning their breakup. She deserved better than to be someone's placeholder until they found someone more suitable. Over the next few weeks, Maria began to quietly reclaim her life. She started updating her resume and applying for jobs outside the healthcare system. She opened her own bank account and began saving whatever money she could. Most importantly, she started remembering who she was before she became David's long-suffering girlfriend. Mrs. Chen noticed the change in her during one of their late-night conversations in the break room. "You seem different lately," the older woman observed. "Stronger somehow." "I think I'm finally waking up," Maria replied. "It just took me longer than it should have." "Sometimes it takes time to see clearly," Mrs. Chen said wisely. "But once you do, you can't go back to sleep." Maria knew she was right. The 8-year promise that had once seemed romantic now felt like a cage she had built around herself. It was time to find the key and set herself free, even if it meant starting over completely. She had lost herself in David's dreams for too long. Now it was time to remember her own. 3 months after discovering David's betrayal, Maria had quietly been building her exit strategy. She had found a small studio apartment across town and secured a day job as an office manager for a local nonprofit organization. The pay wasn't great, but it was honest work that didn't require her to clean up after the man who was planning to dump her. She had given her 2 weeks' notice at the hospital, telling Mrs. Chen that she had found a better opportunity. The older woman hugged her tightly on her last night. "You're doing the right thing," Mrs. Chen said. "I've seen too many young women lose themselves trying to build up men who don't deserve them." Maria had been careful not to let David know about her plans. She continued their routine, cooking dinner when he was home, listening to his stories about the hospital, and pretending she didn't know about his relationship with Jessica. It was the hardest acting job of her life, but she needed time to get everything in order before confronting him. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in June. David had been working late again, supposedly reviewing cases for a weekend conference. But Maria knew better. She was packing the last of her personal items into boxes when she heard his key in the lock. "Maria," David called out as he entered the apartment. "Why are there boxes everywhere?" She emerged from the bedroom, holding the framed photo from their college graduation. "We need to talk, David." Something in her tone must have alerted him because his expression immediately became guarded. "What's going on?" "I'm leaving," she said simply. "I'm moving out this weekend." David sat down heavily on their couch, running his hands through his hair. "Maria, what's brought this on? I know I've been working a lot lately, but once I finish my residency next month, things will calm down." "Will they?" Maria asked, sitting across from him. "Or will you just find new excuses to avoid dealing with the fact that you don't want to be with me anymore?" "That's not true," David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Maria pulled out her phone and showed him a photo she had taken of him and Jessica kissing in Dr. Morrison's office. She had debated whether to confront him with evidence, but she needed him to know that she wasn't leaving because she was insecure or imagining things. David's face went pale as he looked at the photo. "Maria, I can explain." "Can you?" she interrupted. "Can you explain why you've been having an affair for months while I've been cleaning the floors of your hospital? Can you explain why you let me sacrifice 8 years of my life, waiting for a future you never intended to share with me?" David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time since she had known him, he was completely speechless. "I heard you talking to her," Maria continued. "I heard you say that I don't fit into your world, that I don't understand your life. You're right, David. I don't understand how someone can be so selfish and cruel." "Maria, please," David said, reaching for her hand. "Jessica doesn't mean anything to me. It was just a moment of weakness." She pulled her hand away. "Don't lie to me anymore. I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime." "What about our 8 years together?" David asked desperately. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It meant everything to me," Maria replied, and for the first time during the conversation her voice broke slightly. "But it obviously didn't mean the same thing to you. I gave you the best years of my life, David. I supported you when you had nothing, believed in you when you doubted yourself, and waited patiently while you built the career you wanted. And this is how you repay me." David stood up and began pacing the room. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The surgical program is incredibly competitive, and Jessica's father has a lot of influence." "Stop," Maria said firmly. "Just stop. Don't try to justify this by talking about career pressure. You made a choice, David. You chose your ambition over our relationship. You chose someone who could advance your career over someone who actually loved you." "I do love you," David said weakly. "No, you don't," Maria replied with surprising calm. "You love the idea of me. You love having someone who asks for nothing and gives everything. But you don't love me as a person. Because if you did, you would never have treated me this way." She stood up and picked up her purse and keys. "I'll be back this weekend to get the rest of my things while you're at work. I'm not going to make this difficult or dramatic. I just want to move on with my life." "Where will you go?" David asked. And for a moment he sounded like the boy she had fallen in love with 8 years ago. "I got a job at a nonprofit downtown. I found my own apartment. I'm going to figure out who I am when I'm not waiting for someone else to decide my worth." As Maria walked toward the door, David called out one last time. "Maria, wait. What if I ended things with Jessica? What if we could work this out?" She turned back to look at him. This man who had been the center of her universe for nearly a decade. "It's too late for that, David. You've shown me who you really are, and I finally believe you. I deserve someone who chooses me first, not someone who settles for me when their first choice doesn't work out." And with that, Maria Santos walked out of David's life forever, carrying nothing but her dignity and the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to leave. 2 years had passed since Maria walked out of David's apartment, and her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The nonprofit organization where she had started as an office manager had promoted her to program director, recognizing her natural leadership abilities and dedication to their mission of providing educational opportunities for underprivileged young women. Maria had discovered that she had a talent for grant writing and fundraising, skills that her business degree had prepared her for, but she had never had the chance to use. She was making a real difference in people's lives, and more importantly, she was proud of the work she was doing. She had also enrolled in evening classes to earn her master's degree in nonprofit management. It wasn't easy working full-time while studying, but unlike her previous sacrifices, this hard work was for herself and her own future. She had her own studio apartment decorated exactly the way she wanted it, had made new friends who valued her for who she was, and had even started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but she was learning what it felt like to be with men who actually listened when she spoke, who were interested in her thoughts and dreams, who didn't treat her like an accessory to their own ambitions. It was a revelation to discover that relationships could be partnerships between equals, rather than one-sided arrangements. On this particular Tuesday morning, Maria was rushing to a meeting with potential donors when she decided to cut through the medical district to save time. She hadn't been back to St. Mary's Hospital since she left her custodial job 2 years ago, and she felt a mixture of emotions as the familiar building came into view. As she walked past the main entrance, she nearly collided with someone coming out of the revolving door. She looked up to apologize and found herself face-to-face with David for the first time since their confrontation in the apartment. He looked older, more polished in his expensive suit and designer watch. His hair was perfectly styled, and everything about his appearance screamed success. But there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and something hollow in his expression that made him look less substantial than she remembered. "Maria," he said, his voice filled with surprise and something that might have been regret. "Hello, David," she replied calmly. She was surprised by how little she felt looking at him. No anger, no sadness, just a mild curiosity about this stranger, who had once been the most important person in her life. "You look amazing," he said, taking in her professional attire and confident posture. "Really successful. What are you doing these days?" "I'm the program director at Women's Future Foundation," she said. "We provide scholarships and mentorship, programs for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds." "That's incredible," David said, and he seemed genuinely impressed. "I always knew you were smart and capable. I'm glad you found something you're passionate about." The irony wasn't lost on her. It had taken leaving him for David to recognize qualities he had ignored for 8 years. "What about you?" she asked politely. "Did you get the fellowship you wanted?" David's expression clouded slightly. "Actually, no. There was some complication with my application. I'm working as an attending physician now, which is good, but not exactly what I had planned." Maria didn't need him to spell out what had happened. She could read between the lines. His relationship with Jessica had probably caused problems when it became public knowledge. Hospital politics were complicated, and dating the director's daughter while being considered for a prestigious fellowship had likely backfired. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and meant it. She didn't wish failure on anyone, even David. "Maria," David said suddenly, stepping closer to her. "I know this might sound crazy, but I've thought about you so much over the past 2 years. I made a terrible mistake. I threw away the best thing in my life for something that didn't even last 6 months." Maria studied his face, seeing the desperation there. "What happened with Jessica?" "It was never real," David admitted. "We both knew we were using each other. She wanted someone to help her navigate the surgery program, and I thought she could help my career. When her father found out about us, he made it clear that I was no longer welcome in the family circle. Jessica moved on pretty quickly after that." "I see," Maria said quietly. "I know I hurt you terribly," David continued. "I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any chance? Could we try again? I'm different now, I understand what I lost." Maria looked at this man who had once been her entire world and felt nothing but pity for him. He was still the same person he had always been, someone who only valued things after he lost them, someone who mistook convenience for love. "David," she said gently, "I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. That girl who was willing to wait 8 years for someone to decide she was worthy of love? She's gone. I've learned to value myself, and I won't settle for being someone's second choice ever again." "But we had 8 years together," David protested. "That has to count for something." "It does count for something," Maria agreed. "It taught me exactly what I don't want in a relationship. It taught me that love without respect isn't really love at all. And it taught me that I'm strong enough to build a life that makes me happy." David's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I suppose I deserve that." "This isn't about what you deserve," Maria said. "It's about what I deserve. And I deserve someone who chooses me first every single day, not just when all their other options fall through." She glanced at her watch. "I need to get to my meeting. Take care of yourself, David." As she walked away, Maria felt a lightness in her step that she hadn't expected. Seeing David again had been the final confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice. The girl who had cleaned the floors of his hospital while he built his career was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth. She pulled out her phone and texted her friend Sarah, who was meeting her for lunch after the donor meeting. "Just ran into my ex, feeling grateful for my life." Sarah texted back immediately, "Good or bad grateful?" "The best kind," Maria typed back. "The kind that comes from knowing you dodged a bullet." As she entered the office building where her meeting was scheduled, Maria thought about the young women her foundation was helping. Girls who were working multiple jobs to pay for college, who had dreams bigger than their circumstances, who needed to know that their futures weren't dependent on anyone else's approval. She would tell them what she had learned the hard way, that waiting for someone else to validate your worth is a waste of the precious time you could be spending building your own dreams. That love should lift you up, not keep you small. And that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are, so you can choose something better. The 8-year promise that had once defined her life was finally, truly over. And in its place was something far more valuable, the promise she had made to herself to never settle for less than she deserved again.